Hey guys, Matt Allen here. Welcome back to Tactical Bassin. Today we're talking about the fall transition. Where do bass go during the fall transition and how to catch them? The fall transition is the trickiest transition of the entire year. We've been alluding to it for several weeks now. We mention it, we talk specifics about it, but today we're taking a full look at the fall transition, what you can expect, how you know it's begun, and where your fish are headed. The whole purpose of this video is to help you understand where your fish are going and how to get back out in front of them, and then which baits to throw so that you can continue catching fish as we transition from summer into a true fall bite. The reason this is so tricky is because the day remains the same when the transition starts. You as the angler, you're out on the water, you're running your normal pattern, it's working great. You come out again, it's not quite as good, don't think much of it. Come out again, it's almost like your pattern's falling apart, but nothing has changed. The conditions are the same, it looks the same, air temps are the same, so how could there be a transition? It has everything to do with nighttime, and that's why it's so complicated for anglers to realize that it's happening. The fall transition begins the moment your nighttime temperatures have a drop. And I'm not talking about a huge drop. I'm not talking about going from 70 to 40, right? If you have 2 or 3 nights in a row where all of a sudden you walk out in the morning and you're like, whew, almost feels like fall air. That feels good. It's refreshing. Maybe you could almost throw a hoodie on in the morning. Almost. If that happens a couple days in a row, like clockwork, the fall transition has begun. Now, how that impacts different lakes is a huge deal because that will change how it impacts you. The place where you see it hit the hardest and the fastest is lakes that have a lot of grass. Whether that is a highland reservoir, a lowland reservoir, a pond, it doesn't matter. If your fishery has a lot of grass, the fall transition will begin overnight and it will hit hard. In reservoirs that are typically more highland reservoirs, but reservoirs that have less grass, where fish tend to already be on docks, standing timber, things like that, the transition won't hit as such a solid punch. It'll take a little bit longer. But for those guys on grass fisheries, brace yourself. If it hasn't already begun, it is coming any day. So here's what happens. The second we get those first couple of cooler nights, the grass in the lake immediately begins to respond and it begins to die back a little bit. I'm not talking about giant fields of grass dying overnight, although sometimes you'll have like cheese, where cheese will be blooming, of all this cheese on the surface, and then almost overnight it vanishes. That is shocking. But I'm just talking about your grass beds don't look quite as healthy as they did. You're not seeing a lot of new growth, starting to look a little more dead, a little more brown. The second that happens, bass abandon that grass. They are headed one of two places. Either one, they're headed to grass that is still healthy and growing, because bass use the grass this time of year for several reasons. In a really shallow fishery, it's not just about cover. It's also about oxygen. There is a lot more oxygen in that grass. The grass is producing oxygen, so the fish are in there. The second it starts to die, that oxygen production just stops, and the value of that grass goes to nothing, and the bass are out of there like a rocket. They're headed either to healthy grass where there's still oxygen production, or they're headed to hard cover and structure. So where you need to be looking, where you need to be spending your time is hard structure near the grass you were catching fish in. So if you had a giant expansive grass flat, the fish are headed one of two places. Some go shallow, some go deep. They're gonna pull out to the edge of that flat where it starts to break to deeper water. They're gonna find a hard edge out there. If that's a rocky edge, all the better. If it's just a drop off, they'll be there. The ones that go shallow, they pull right to hard cover. They're going to be under docks. They're going to be in laydowns. This is an amazing time of year for you, because a week or two ago, you might have had to frog and flip for miles of grass to find a big bite. Well, now, the second that transition begins, those fish pull up to that hard cover, and now that miles of grass might only have a dozen laydowns or half a dozen docks. Those best fish went right there, and you can go straight there and you can catch them. It just narrows down where you need to fish so much. And so many people miss this transition. What happens is guys don't realize that it started. So a guy will be on his bite, it'll be dwindling, and instead of adapting, instead of trying to get ahead of it, they try to hold on to what they had. So maybe you were on a great crankbait bite, now you're throwing a jig in the same places. Then you're throwing a worm in the same place, and now you're really picking it apart. When in reality, you should have realized the fish were abandoning that spot, headed somewhere new, and you needed to go and get out in front of them. Now, so many of them have made the transition, they've left you behind. You don't even have breadcrumbs to follow. They made a full switch without you. You're still here catching the one or two that are hanging behind, and you're just spun. We're here to help. So again, grassy lakes where the fish are up in that stuff, that transition is instant. Fisheries where the fish love to be offshore on structure. So if you were on a good ledge bite, if you're fishing offshore humps, things like that. Some fish will stay offshore if there's a good bait fish population, and they'll begin roaming. So they abandon the actual cover and they focus entirely on the bait fish. They'll follow them in open water. Those fish are difficult to catch, but it can be done. We'll do a more in-depth video on that soon. Tim is really good at targeting those fish out in the open, those suspended fish. But just know that that's where those fish are disappearing to. They're literally floating around out there. That's why you'll see fish suddenly come up busting and then vanish again. When they're up, you can catch them. But the rest of the time, you don't know where they are. It's really difficult, but those fish can be targeted. But the ones that are up in the cover, you know now they're on hard cover instead of soft cover, and that's a huge deal. For guys that are on more highland reservoirs or anywhere else, whether that be a pond that's steeper and deeper, whether that be a lowland reservoir that for one reason or another just doesn't have a lot of grass, your fish were already orienting around hard cover and hard structure. That will continue. But the big difference is that your fish will really become bait fish focused as we go through this transition. So you're going to spend a lot more time targeting areas where the fish can corral bait. And again, this happens deep and shallow. So I've got a bunch of baits here, and I'll talk through that in a minute. And we'll just breeze through them because in the video description, I'll link them. And in the coming weeks, we'll go much more in depth on these topics. But if you want a head start, if you want to know what's coming, I'll link all those baits for you. But again, these fish, they're going to be in places where they can corral bait. So if you had fish in more of a steeper canyon reservoir, they will tend to start driving bait fish off of the main body and into deep pockets right along that main body. Now, some will push way back in the arms. They will all the way to the backs. But I think the most overlooked places are those pockets just off the main body, where a group of offshore fish can suddenly corral a bait fish, a group of bait fish into a pocket. They will hold them there for weeks or months and just pick them off. If a good group of spotted bass or smallmouth can corral a bunch of shad into a deep pocket, they'll hold them all the way through the fall. It's amazing. Now, largemouth tend to push them farther back into creek arms. That just seems to be what they prefer to do. So if you're on a highland reservoir, you're looking for either the backs of those creeks, the ones that are deeper, because as the nights get cooler, it gets harder and harder for those fish to be up in the really shallow stuff. So they tend to use the deeper creek arms. Or out there on that main body, look for that first good pocket right off the main body, and they'll pack bait fish into there too. It also helps if you have a prevailing wind, pay attention to that. If you get a lot of wind from the west, you're gonna tend to see them pushing bait fish into pockets on the east side. Prevailing wind, bait fish over time it's not like they literally get blown across the lake. It's not that strong of a current, but they tend to just eventually end up on that side. So the bass will tend to catch them on pockets on that side. So prevailing wind can really be a big player. But again, just finding those transitional areas. Now, it's not all bait fish oriented. I mean, you can certainly still throw jigs and creature baits and worms and target fish that way. But I love to focus on bait fish. Main reason is a lot of the fish are after those bait fish. So a lot of the fish are susceptible to those baits. But the bigger deal, and as I look here, literally every bait I laid out has to do with bait fish. The bigger reason for me is that I can cover water much more quickly. When we're in this transition, it happens over a period of time. So I am always running new places, running new spots, trying to replicate. If I find them in a pocket, I try and mirror that other places on the lake, or go to another lake, look for it there too. I'm trying to build a consistent pattern, and I can do that much more quickly with moving baits than I can with slow bottom contact baits. It's all about building patterns and identifying locations that I can build on going into the fall. So pond guys, I don't want to overlook you. Pond guys, this is the one time where you really can just decide, do I sound more like a lowland reservoir or more like a highland reservoir? Are you shallower and grassy? Focus on what I said about grass lakes. Are you steeper, clearer, less grass? Focus on what I said about highland. You're just a miniature version of one of those two. Natural lakes, you tend to lean towards the grassy end of it. Even if you don't have grass in there, natural lakes tend to have a lot less drastic transition, right? Just a lot of flowing contour. So your fish will pull to that hard cover more often than not. If there's laydowns that have fallen in, if you've got rock, they'll be on those things right away. And then river guys, it's kind of a different animal. You've still got good temps, so the fish love to be in that current. They love to sit in that first eddy below really fast water. But once they start driving bait fish around in there, you're going to find that they'll push the bait off into pockets. That might be a little cove off of the river, or that might be a tributary coming in, but they'll push the bait into there and they'll corral it just like they would out on a reservoir. And once they've got them corralled, they hold them. So if you come in there and you break it up by getting too close, it's a mess. You've got to back out and let them reset. Same thing in a reservoir. You want to stay back from these fish and try to reach them as much as possible, because if you break up the bait fish that they have schooled, your bite will go away, unless it's in deep water. Then you can stay over the top of them. But up in shallow water, you don't want to break them up. Stay back, fish them from a distance, and you can do really well. Now again, I already said my baits are kind of all oriented around bait fish, and that's not by mistake. So I've got 4 kinds of lures for fishing shallower, and then a few for fishing deeper. Shallower, first one's gonna be a chatterbait. Again, I wanna cover a lot of water. You know we love a jackhammer, right? That's my #1 chatterbait. But I have fallen in love with that Mini Max. I talk about it a lot. Now colors, I tend to be throwing bait fish profiles. There's absolutely a time and a place for a smaller bluegill profile as well this time of year, especially in ponds and natural lakes, lowland reservoirs. You get a lot of those baby panfish, little bluegill, little crappie, little perch, and they are little. So that smaller downsized guy is killer this time of year. I spend a ton of time throwing a square bill during the transition. Later on, I throw a lipless a lot, not yet. The reason why is that most of my fisheries as I travel around still have a lot of grass. It's dying back, but it's still present. So you'll get hung up in that a lot. A square bill just does a lot better job of fishing through it. My main bait is the biggie. We usually throw the biggie papa, and this is the gizzard shad color. It's my favorite color in the fall. But I also throw the little guy, the biggie smalls. It's a profile thing. How big are the bait fish? If you see bass chasing them, if you catch bass and they spit them up, pay attention to how big the bait fish are and then adjust accordingly. And then the other one is the Spro, the little Fat John 50, because he'll go really shallow. As they push bait into the backs of the pockets, they'll push it up really, really shallow, and it's hard to get a lot of square bills through there, but that's one that will go dirt shallow. It's a huge player for me during the transition and on into the fall. The jerkbait comes back in full force. I'm focusing all my time on baits that have a lot of flash. Megabass Vision 110. If I'm leaning more towards the finesse end of things, clearer water, more open water, trying to pull fish off of deeper structure, I spend a lot of time with that bait. If it's a little more power fishing, maybe it's a little dingier, I can get away with a little heavier line, then I throw that world minnow. Both are amazing options. Both will slay those fish. The world minnow with that flash in there is a huge deal. This is a 1-2 punch. If I'm throwing a jerkbait, I will have both of them tied on all the time because they're so different. I need to check both for the bite. And then last is gonna be topwater. We recently did a topwater video for that late summer window. I throw a lot of those straight retrieve baits like a whopper plopper. I love that whopper plopper 110 this time of year. But this year for me has been the year of the finesse bait for whatever reason. I think because I got BFS in my head and I just can't get it out. So I'm always trying little stuff in every category. So 2 walking baits that I've actually done a lot of damage with already in the beginning of this transition is the Megabass, that guy right there, and then this little guy, this little owner. Both of these are baits that I had previously overlooked. I've had them for a long time, particularly this one. I've had this one forever, but I just hadn't put the time into them. Both of these have proven to be fish catchers. This guy is so small. Like, both of these are small. This one's tiny. This isn't even a big whopper plopper. That's only the 110. Look how much smaller this bait is. I mean, it's micro in comparison. Compare it to like a 10XD. It's micro. A lot of times this time of year, the bait fish is small. In fact, I have one tied on right here. Little chartreuse back, same bait. I love this bait. A lot of my bait fish are smaller here. And I've been throwing that downsized topwater and it's super darty. Fish it really fast right on top. They've been crushing it. That's a really cool bait that I had overlooked previously. So that's sort of where I'm at for fishing shallower. For fishing deeper, I do one of 2 things. I'm either cranking or I'm throwing bladed baits. Crankbaits, keep it really simple. Obviously, I throw our Tactical DD. This is when I really start to see this bait shine from now into the fall and winter. As soon as temperatures begin to drop, that bait just explodes. I catch a ton of giants in the fall into the winter on that bait. That's what we built it for. And then if I need to go really deep, I go all the way and I go to a Strike King 10XD. But those 2 baits are going to cover the vast majority of my deep fishing for me in terms of crankbait. And then I said the rest of what I do is bladed baits. And what I mean is basically metal baits. Be that a tail spin, like the Daracoup, where I can fish that slow along bottom, or I can hop it and let it fall down drops. The blade bait, that Demiki Vault. It's just an incredible blade bait. And then the spoon, the Flutter Spoon, Nichols Flutter Spoon has been a killer for me this year. I've caught so many fish on that as we've gotten into late summer, and that will just continue to shine on those deeper fish because, again, the fish split. There are a lot of fish that push bait shallow, but there are also fish that will corral bait deep. They'll push bait. If there's a bend in a bluff wall, they'll hold them there. If you've got an offshore creek channel, they'll pin them into the bend of that creek channel. They'll hold them offshore just like they do up shallow. And sometimes those are the really, really big fish. Those spots can be more difficult to find. You need to spend a lot more time on your mapping looking for them because visibly you look out in the open water, you can't see them. But if you spend time looking at your mapping, the ends of a long tapering point, if it's got a bit of a bend to it out there at the end, right in the pocket of that bend, those fish should be sitting there waiting to ambush. There are key offshore structures that these fish use as we head into fall. And again, a lot of the really big ones stay deep. Not all of them, but a lot of them. So both shallow and deep are worth spending time on. The fall transition is a great time to be on the water. You can catch giants, but most importantly, you can stay on top of the fish, you can catch fish, and you have the building blocks you need to build an incredible fall pattern that will last all the way to winter. If you stop following your fish, it gets a lot harder to get back out in front of them. You almost have to start over just looking for the right types of structures. But if you've already got your fish sitting at the end of the summer pattern, and you know the structures they should go to, you find the closest ones to where your fish are or where they were, and you immediately know where to go and you can get in front of them. Hopefully this helps you guys. If it did, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and we'll talk to you soon.